have very close cooperation in many fields. I think it's the same thing which you can see among different players, different actors. Let's take a completely, an example which is totally far away from us. Argentina and Brazil, traditional rivals. Mexico and Brazil, traditional rivals. They had huge rivalries in the past. But today when you look at them, they continue to have rivalry and competition. But there is also close cooperation. Friend Ambassador Vishwanathan always reminds us, the export of Sao Paulo, one governorate of Brazil, to Argentina is more than Argentina's exports to United States. It's that kind of close commercial cooperation, commercial interaction, which characterizes today's world, rather than purely intense, either military rivalry or strategic competition. So we are seeing a somewhat more dispersed ways of interacting with each other, from the proxy war by Pakistan into Jammu and Kashmir to, let's say, Argentina-Brazil relationship. So now coming to China and Pakistan, as the saying goes, you can choose your partners, but you can't choose your neighbors or your parents. So your neighbors are given to you, you have to deal with them. If the neighbor is adversarial, you deal with the adversary in ways in which you are best placed, where you can derive the optimal outcomes. The reason for saying that is, for example, in the case of, the painful reminder of 1962, we were caught unawares, and we did not perform well enough, as well as we could have. But you look at the Indo-Pak wars of, say, 1971, even Kargil, we could overwhelm the adversary. So it also depends on how prepared you are. The question was, what are the implications for us? The implications for us are what I think it was attributed to Ronald Reagan. No? Trust but verify, keep the powder dry. I think this was one of those kind of things. You can always trust, you can always say, yes, it's good relations, bye, it's all very good. But at the end, pay attention to not what they say, but what they do. Second, always be prepared for the worst. Always, do good, always say the nice things, but be prepared for the worst consequences and be prepared to face them. The nexus between China and Pakistan, something which we saw through history. Even when they were developing the closest relations with the United States in terms of becoming members of, CENTO and Baghdad Pact and something else, they always had their routes open to China in terms of military collaboration. They got, in terms of nuclear technology, they got the wherewithal from China. So something which we need to be aware, which we need to be conscious. At the same time, we need to be able to deal with them, knowing full well that these realities will be with us for decades to come. Because again, what are the choices that, China of course is a continental power, is a power which does not treat any one of us as their equals or near equals. But for Pakistan, the moment Pakistan gives up its adversarial relations with India, what will be the existence or the state of existence of Pakistan, one does not know. What kind of ideology, what kind of value system will it have, one does not know. For them, adversarial relationship with India is the raison d'etre for their existence. So, we have to take it as a given. Whether you are members of the armed forces or the academia or practitioners of diplomacy or whichever other professions or vocations we belong to, I think it's a given that the relations with Pakistan will be adversarial. The relations with China will be competitive. I don't think there is any running away from them. and the close nexus between the two countries is something which our strategic thinkers, strategic planners, the strategic community, the academic community have to be extremely, extremely conscious about. That's what I would like to say. I'm glad that we are doing under Chatham House rules for World
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for keeping the flag flying for MEA. There is a business question here, and that is to do with the fact that business ethics in China, if you look at how Chinese companies do business, what is your personal view of how ethical are Chinese business? Is there something distinctive about Chinese ethics as compared to Indian ethics or a Sindhi ethics or whatever? The person has asked is Anup Mandavaria, CM Fellow, Social Justice and Empower Department. Okay.
When I went to Shanghai, I went from Holland. I was posted in the Netherlands, where I was in the same business of promoting Indian business, economic relationship. And in Holland, India was identified as one of the emerging markets that Netherlands had to look at. And the Dutch felt that they had really missed the bus in terms of India. They had not been proactive enough, and they really wanted to see the opportunities. So there were n number of seminars and consultants who mushroomed around the town who would tell you about Indian business ethics. So similarly, business ethics is something which you have to learn, which you have to go and go to the country, see how it is. Every country has a different business ethics. We are different. For the European, our business ethics is different. I mean, famously, something which would always irritate an Indian is that first sentence in a class like this would be, you never know with an Indian whether he's saying yes or no. I mean, they nod their head like this. Then some specialist will come and say, no, in North India they nod their head like this, but in South India they nod their head like this. I mean, sitting there, one would get really sort of agitated about. You have to look at the substance. It's not the nodding of the head which is important. So I think it's the same with the Chinese. You have to really get to know them. But definitely there is a word called guangxi. It's a Chinese word which is very well known in the business community, that unless you have guangxi, you can't get things done. I think it's equally applicable all over the world. Would you do business with somebody whom you can't trust? Would you do business with somebody with whom you haven't sat on a table and had a meal, or at least had a sort of a personal relationship? I think it's the guangxi, which is famously the business ethics of China. I think it goes for many countries. For businessmen, they have to learn on the ground what is the business ethics of each country.
I'd like your comments, Riva, before you put down the mic. Can you please raise your hands, all those who are going to China in October? Very good. This is their first visit that they are going to China. Do you have some words of wisdom for them, what to do and what should they not miss, and what should they should definitely do when they visit? Which cities are you visiting? Nina, which cities are you visiting?
We're going to Shanghai, Guangzhou, Luwu, Beijing.
Altogether 52 are going from Nirma in the month of October, which is a very nice number, So, if these are the cities, what are the things that, as students of business, is there something that you would like to guide them with?
Beijing is of course the historical capital. There's plenty to see in Beijing, but Shanghai is comparatively a very young city. It was, I think Shanghai was notified as a city only in 1292, which is very, very young compared to Chinese sort of timelines. But Shanghai is, you must see the infrastructure in Shanghai. I would strongly recommend, if there is time, to go and see what is called the Yangshan Deepwater Port, which we insisted, and we took Honorable Chief Minister also to see that. This is a port which, Shanghai is a port city, and the river that runs through Shanghai is called the Hangpu River. Hangpu River typically is a very shallow river. It has only 66 meters of draft. So traditionally, big ships had to wait for the high tide to come into the city, to come into the port. They built a second port for, with a little more draft, but still that doesn't meet their requirements. So what the government has done is that there were a set of islands out there in the sea. Those islands have been flattened, and again, Dutch technology of land filling has been done, and a 10-kilometer port is coming up, 38 kilometers off the final shore. So there is a 38-kilometer bridge which is called the Donghai Bridge, and this is like the Sea Link that we have in Bombay, except that this is a 38-kilometer bridge, and once you're in the middle of the bridge, you can't see land on either side. And it's a fascinating project, and three phases of this project have come up, and it's basically a transshipment hub, and this port, which is called the Yangshan Deepwater Port, has finally taken over Singapore. So it is the largest port in the world. It is 38 kilometers into the sea. It has got a draft of 14 to 15 meters, and the biggest ships in the world can dock there. And it was a project which started off as a private sector consortium, including Merckx and all. They invested in the first phase, and slowly the private sector is being eased out, and it is under government control now. And the last phases are, the investment is coming from the Chinese government. But it is an absolutely amazing project to see. That it's an infrastructure marvel, and what has happened is that the entire shipbuilding industry has been shifted from the city to an island which is close to this bridge and to the port. So the shipping hub and the logistics hub, which feeds into Shanghai's main objective of becoming a logistics hub. So all this fits in together. So the shipping industry has gone that side. There is an industrial belt which is coming that side. So it's a very interesting project to see for the business administration students.
One related question is, when you have mentioned that industries are being shifted out, does the government incentivize and compensate industry for movement?
Yeah, land is given, and a lot of the old warehouses, factories are not really brought down. You see, they are, if there is time, I can just devote 2 minutes to another objective. Shanghai wants to become the cultural hub of China. So what they're doing is all these steel mills and all, like Bao Steel has been thrown out of the main part of the city. But the steel mill remains, the big building with the pipes and the boilers and everything. That has been changed into an art hub. It's now a hall, a nice auditorium, and an art hub. So that's what is happening with many of the old structures, which are not being brought down, but they're being changed into these very fashionable and trendy art, culture, fashion hubs. And Shanghai has about 5 to 6 huge auditoriums with sitting capacity of more than thousands. And this is all being built to make it into a cultural hub. So the companies are moved out, they are given land, and the metro now is all over the city, including into the satellite cities. So obviously there are incentives, but when you clean the city, you just take everybody out of the city.
Okay, got the message. Okay. Now these are questions about development of China and what is it that we can learn from there. Now I don't know how the MEA is likely to respond to this, and therefore I would like to help the discussions by asking Mr. Kolgi and Mr. Rajesh Kishore to join these discussions if they feel like. The question is that the Chinese model of development was based on low-cost manufacturing and labor-intensive industries. We in India have not been able to emulate it, and this is a question, or the direction is from Kishore Dharia from SPIPA Study Center. If you could raise your hand. Sorry? Oh, yes, okay. Then we have Param Shah from FICCI, who has also raised this issue of, how do we see our development, and what is it that India, in order to integrate with the international trading system, do we need to emphasize external trade as a far more important component of our operational or the developmental strategy? We have Janak Odektra from SPIPA. Okay. Should the state play a more active role in the economy as is being done in China? And so these three questions all related to the same issue. Is there a learning in India from China And is this trend likely to continue, or is because the Chinese themselves are moving into value-added products and away from capital labor intensive, because their labor costs are also rising? So what's the picture? Let's take a view across the room. Maybe you can begin with what is the future for labor-intensive industries of China, Riva?
This is really for an economist to answer, but I can say that for cities which are very well developed, like cities like Shanghai, Nanjing, Hangzhou, these are all big cities on the eastern coast where per capita income is in the range of 11,000, 12,000 US dollars. They are highly developed cities. They've developed on the basis of industry, but all of them have now decided to move up the value chain. The government of China has identified 21 cities as IT hubs. Now these are cities which get actual subsidies, etc., to develop them as IT hubs. And the cities which have decided to move on in the value chain, naturally, the industry then is especially polluting, because there were also questions about environment. These industries are now moving more and more towards where less development has taken place. So, and learning, of course, you see at the level of government, we are constantly exchanging delegations to learn. There are n number of delegations which come from India to China to learn. The Chinese want to learn from us in the banking sector. You see, in the financial sector, how do we do agricultural financing? How do we do SME financing? These are all. So there are areas where both of us want to learn from each other. Agricultural storage, for instance, we had a delegation from FCI go in and see how China has high-tech silos in which they're able to store grains. So learning is done on both sides. We have certain achievements, they have certain achievements. We both want to learn from each other. I think
IT also they want to learn from.
IT certainly, IT there is a lot of interest to learn, and they definitely in education sector also, especially management, law. More and more Chinese universities, academic institutions are entering into MOUs with Indian institutions, Indian academics. They want to encourage this exchange of teachers, exchange of students.